Hi, I'm Vladimir and this is MTRA channel. Here we talk about programming and modern tech. In this video we will continue talking about React, and here we will talk what Lifecycle is and how to interact with it. Let's get started. In the previous video about React, I was talking about the base tag that lies under the hood of the library and virtual DOM. Now it's time to discuss another important matter, lifecycle. That is the next level of understanding how React works. React lifecycle describes the different working stages of a component. There are a lot of built-in methods in React that work according to the lifecycle. To understand how to build efficient and optimized application, you must learn these methods and how to implement them. So, there are three stages of React component lifecycle: mounting, updating, and unmounting. Mounting is the phase where the component initializes itself, reading the whole code, processing requirements, preparing initial component props and state, and then drawing the component itself, or in other words, adding a component to the DOM. Updating the component means that the state has been changed and G6 needs to be re-rendered. As the result of this phase, the component has been added to the DOM with some changes, or it just been updated. The last stage of React component is unmounting. At this stage, the element is removed from DOM. React has two types of components, class component and functional component. They work quite similarly, although there is difference in interaction with lifecycle. The standard class component extends React component entity, and it means that class component inherits a lot of methods that can be implemented in the body of class, and then a developer can write functional in these methods. These methods would be called according to lifecycle that is built in a parent component. A functional component is a function, as you can see from the naming, so it does not extend anything and so it does not inherit anything from the parent, but it has hooks which can be imported from the library and added to the body of a component. So because the hooks are imported from the library and because they connected to the lifecycle, they have limitation and rules. For instance, the hooks can be called inside each other, so you can't use state hook inside the useEffect callback function. And hooks can be called only on the first level of the component. However, it's possible to create custom hooks which can contain built-in hooks. You can just create your own use some shit hook, and then you can implement inside this function a lot of different hooks to write your own functionality. Let's get back to the scheme. All methods displayed on the scheme are used in class component. Let's discuss each method separately by order of processing. The first in the scheme is constructor. Basically, this function is a standard JavaScript class method called on initialization of a class object. So basically, React component constructor is needed to initialize the state object of a component and props passed to it. And it is important to notice that props must be passed to the super. Nothing special there, React just need to initialize them under the hood. In functional component there is no analog to this function. Everything initialized by React automatically. You need just to call hooks. The next method in the mounting process is getDerivedState from props. This method is a static function of the basic class. The method is called right after constructor. It has as attributes state and props and returns new state object. It is useful in case some past value to a component should be merged in a component state. Functional components do not have the analog of this function, although it can be replicated using useEffect hook. This method adds extra render to the component, so in this case it is better to manage the state on a higher level. The next step is a render function. This is the only obligatory method that must be implemented in a class component. This method simply passes G6 markup of a component that will be built in DOM. React functional component does not have a special function, it just returns G6, so a functional component is obliged to return markup. The last method of mounting is component did mount. This method does not have any parameters and returns. This one is called when component has successfully been rendered to the DOM after mount. So this method works once in the life cycle of a component. As you may see in functional component, there is a kind of an analog using useEffect hook. This hook is multifunctional, particularly using useEffect with empty array. It will work as component did mount in class component. The next cycle is updating. It contains 5 methods as we can see from the scheme. Although there are 2 methods that work in mounting and updating, get derived state from props and render. Their functionality is identical for both stages, so then there are 3 methods that we need to look closer. Should component update, get snapshot before update, and component did update. Method should component update goes before render. The method allows developers to create functions that prevent useless updates. On input, this method gets next props, next state, and next context. So using input argument, developers can write an algorithm to check changes, to block re-render if there are no changes. As a result, the function obliged to return boolean value. False would mean that component shouldn't be updated, and true would mean opposite. There is an analog of this method in functional component, memo. This function is imported from React package and it works as a wrapper for component. As presented on the screen, memo takes a volley component as a first parameter and function to compare props as a second parameter. The second parameter is not obligatory. On default, React compares automatically props by its algorithm. However, this algorithm isn't great and works mostly for primitives. So in case your component takes object as a prop, then you need to write your own function or use third-party libraries to make this comparison. The next method is getSnapShotBeforeUpdate. This method triggers when change is about to render into DOM. This method has as arguments previous props and previous state, and thus it gives access to them for developer to modify component from there. There is no analog of this method in functional component. Any value returned by getSnapShotBeforeUpdate will be passed as a parameter to component did update, and thus calling one you must call another. The last method of the updating cycle, component did update. This method triggers right after the component was updated in DOM and all processes of update were finished. As an argument, this method has previous props, state, and snapshot, and thus can be used to catch changes and the state mutations to modify component or trigger some function. In functional component, developers can achieve similar results implementing useEffect. As was said earlier, useEffect with empty array of dependencies is component did mount, but providing some states to the array, it will become component did update. This hook works really great. If you need to follow changes of one particular state, add only it into the array. You need to listen several changes of several states and trigger the same function, add all these states to the array. Additionally, you can invoke several useEffects in one component. Well, the last cycle of React component is unmounting. It has only one method, component will unmount, because this cycle removes the element from DOM. I mean that if component is about to be removed, what else can be done? So there is only component will unmount. That is triggered before unmounting, of course. It does not have any arguments, And mostly this method is used to unlink something or break some asynchronous code, because as component will be deleted, the result is already not needed. For example, if you have some listener on element inside the component, it is better be removed when component is deleted because there is no need to listen anymore. Well, surprise, surprise, but in functional component, the same functionality can be achieved using useEffect hook. If to add return with callback inside useEffect hook, this callback will be called before unmounting. This hook is really something use-effective. I hope you found something interesting and useful here. If I missed something, leave a comment. If you like my videos, click subscribe and like buttons, and let's make the array less empty and code the future together.